Yes, we are still talking about squirrel diets today. You sent over a ton of research on squirrels and how what they eat is changing, especially in cities.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, in a world that's, increasingly shaped by humans, are we, inadvertently kind of reshaping the wild things around us too, even something as simple as a squirrel's diet?
Sounds like you're on a mission to become the most informed squirrel watcher at your local park. Let's dive in and see what we can uncover.
I am ready to go nuts.
Well, speaking of nuts, that's where I thought we'd start. What does a squirrel's natural diet even look like, before we humans enter the picture?
It's way more diverse than most people think. They do love their nuts and seeds, of course, but their menu also includes things like fruits and fungi, and even like the occasional insect. Variety is really key for their survival.
So it's not just a steady diet of acorns like in those old cartoons.
Not at all. And it's not just what they eat, but how they eat, too. Have you ever noticed how much time squirrels spend foraging and stashing food? There's a fascinating connection between their behavior and the health of the ecosystems they live in.
Oh, right. I remember reading about squirrels being like little gardeners, burying nuts and seeds, and, those eventually sprout into new trees.
Exactly. That seed burying habit isn't just about like planning for a rainy day. It's essential for forest regeneration. Squirrels are literally like shaping the landscape with their dietary choices.
That's incredible. I never thought about it that way. But then enter us humans with our picnics and
Right.
less than perfect trash disposal habits,
Mm-mm.
Suddenly squirrels have a whole new menu to explore.
Right. It's true. We've kind of unintentionally created a parallel food system for these urban dwellers.
And it's not always a healthy one, right? I mean, a cookie's not exactly an acorn when we're talking nutrition.
You're totally right. Human food tends to be so much higher in carbs and fat compared to their natural diet. It's like
Right.
comparing a balanced meal to like a bag of chips.
And those dietary differences, have real consequences. It's not just squirrels getting a bit round.
Sadly, no, you're right. The research mentions obesity, which can make them slower and more vulnerable. But there are also dental problems from the sugary snacks and even bone disease from an imbalance of calcium and phosphorus.
There's one study that really stuck with me. It found that urban red squirrels, most of their sugar was coming from biscuits people were giving them, were turning them into dessert addicts.
It's a perfect example of how our good intentions can have unintended consequences. We see a cute squirrel, we want to share, but we're contributing to some serious health problems in the long run.
It makes you think twice about those harmless handouts. But it's not just physical health that's affected. This easy access to food also changes how they behave, right?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a squirrel that can easily find a peanut offered up by a human. Why bother meticulously searching for acorns or burying them for later?
I guess they become reliant on humans for their next meal. Kind of like someone who always orders takeout and forgets how to cook for themselves.
That's such a great analogy. And there's research on that. One study found park squirrels actually shifted their whole activity schedule to match when people were most likely to feed them. So they're adapting to our routines, but is it really in their best interest? That's something to think about.
So we're seeing these changes, in squirrel behavior. And I'm starting to wonder about the bigger picture. If squirrels are adapting to this new human-influenced world, like what does that mean for their populations? Do they boom, or do they bust?
That's where it gets really complex. And the research you sent digs into that. On the one hand, having this like consistent food source could lead to more squirrels surviving and having more babies. And you might think, oh, great, more adorable squirrels. But then you have to remember what we were talking about with overgrazing.
Right. Too many squirrels all munching away could be a problem for the plants there, and even other species that rely on the same resources.
Exactly. More squirrels equals more competition for food and shelter, and that can have effects throughout the ecosystem. Think about a park you go to. Overgrazing could change what kinds of plants grow there. It could even lead to bare patches where the ground is vulnerable to erosion.
Wow. I never thought that those seemingly small changes could have a big impact on the whole environment.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how interconnected everything is in nature. When you introduce something new, like readily available human food, it can really throw the whole system off balance.
Okay, so more squirrels equals more competition. But I'm still confused. Some of the research mentioned that urban squirrels, even with all this extra food, sometimes have lower body mass than the ones in the forest. Shouldn't they be chubbier?
It does seem counterintuitive, right? But there are a couple of theories about why this might be. One possibility is that the competition in a densely populated urban area is so fierce that even with the extra food, they're still burning more calories than they take in.
It's like a constant hustle for those city squirrels.
Exactly. They might have more options, but also way more mouths to feed. Another theory is that with the constant access to food, they don't need to store as much fat, like squirrels in a more seasonal environment would.
Ah, so no need for winter reserves when a friendly human might offer them a peanut.
But if they're not getting bigger, does that mean all this extra food is making them healthier overall?
Well, not necessarily. Their body mass might not be higher, but there's evidence that urban squirrels have more breeding females and produce more offspring.
So lots of babies, but maybe not the healthiest parents. That doesn't sound great long term. Is it possible that we're influencing their evolution by changing their diets?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's something scientists are studying. There's research suggesting a link between supplemental feeding and changes in skull shape in red squirrels.
Wait, skull changes? How could giving them a peanut change their bone structure?
I know, it's crazy, right? But the study found that squirrels with access to supplemental food had skulls with shorter snouts and smaller jaws compared to their wild counterparts. So are they evolving to be like less good at cracking nuts and foraging?
It's possible. And it really shows how human actions, even small ones, can have big, unintended consequences on the evolutionary path of a species. It's like we're running a giant, uncontrolled experiment.
This is giving me a lot to think about next time I see a squirrel eyeing my sandwich. But we've talked a lot about how human food impacts squirrels and their environment. What about us? Are there risks for humans who interact with squirrels, especially those who feed them?
Yeah, that's important to talk about. Feeding squirrels, especially in concentrated areas, increases the risk of disease transmission.
You mean like if a bunch of squirrels are all huddled together, snacking on someone's old pizza crust?
Exactly. More squirrels close together means more chances for them to spread diseases to each other. And some of those diseases can spread to humans, too.
So that cute squirrel nibbling on a peanut could be carrying something harmful.
It's definitely a risk. We tend to focus on how cute they are and forget that wild animals can carry pathogens that are harmful to humans.
Right, you mentioned leptospirosis. And the research also mentioned things like salmonella and even rabies.
Yes, those are just a few examples of diseases that squirrels can spread through bites or scratches. And remember, feeding squirrels makes them bolder, less afraid of us, which can actually increase the chances of those negative encounters.
So trying to be kind might be putting ourselves at risk. It's incredible how something as simple as a squirrel's diet is connected to all these complex issues, from the ecosystem health to human health.
Yeah, it really shows how important it is to understand how interconnected our world is. Our actions, even the ones that seem small or well-intentioned, can have big consequences that we might not even expect.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of squirrels. I'm sure listeners' name is finding it just as interesting as I am. We've uncovered a lot of information, but there's always more to explore. We'll be back after a quick break to wrap things up and leave you with something to think about. Okay, we're back. And I have to say, listeners' name, my head is spinning a little bit after all that.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in. We went from those, charming pictures of squirrels bearing nuts to all these, ecological and evolutionary implications.
It really is. It's like discovering a whole hidden world in our own backyards. So much going on that we don't even realize.
And so much we still don't fully understand, but that's what's cool about science, right? Always more to find out.
Okay, so let's bring it back to you, listener's name. You're out for a walk, and a squirrel runs up to you, batting those big eyes, hoping for a treat. What have we learned that can help you make a better choice in that moment?
You gotta resist those eyes. I know it sounds harsh, but we've seen that those handouts can cause a chain reaction of unintended consequences. Not just for the squirrels themselves, but the whole ecosystem, too.
So basically, admire them from afar, keep those peanuts in your pocket.
Exactly. There are other ways to help out squirrels, that don't involve turning them into junk food junkies.
Like what? Give us some ideas. How can we create a more, squirrel-friendly environment without messing with their natural instincts?
Well, think about providing natural food sources. Plant native trees and shrubs in your yard, oak, hickory, walnut, things like that. Or even advocate for more of them in your local parks.
So work with nature, not against it.
Exactly. And another easy one is making sure your trash cans are secure. Squirrels are so resourceful, they'll find any excuse to get into those leftover snacks. And if you're into bird feeding, invest in a squirrel-proof feeder. They're pretty acrobatic, but there are designs out there that can outsmart even the most determined squirrel.
It's all about respecting their place in the environment and letting them, thrive on their own terms.
Totally. And remember, you could still enjoy watching them. Observing those natural behaviors like foraging, chasing each other, burying nuts, it can be even more rewarding than some close encounter fueled by, potato chips.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how connected we are to the wildlife around us. Even the tiniest things we do can have a big impact, for better or worse.
It makes you realize we're all a part of this big web of life, and the more we learn about how it all works, the better choices we can make for ourselves and for the natural world.
We've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully this has made you curious listeners' name and inspired you to look at those squirrels in your neighborhood in a new way.
And if you're looking to dig deeper, there are tons of resources online and in libraries. Maybe you'll even find some cool research that inspires your next deep dive.
Until next time, happy squirrel watching. And remember, sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let wild things be wild.